Hi everyone, well it's finally here. Baldur's Gate 3, developed by Larian Studios, has just entered early access, which is predicted to last about a year before the game is ready for its final release. The game's quite different from the previous Baldur's Gate titles, so today I'm going to talk about my initial experiences with the game, some of the things I liked, some of the things I thought maybe not quite so great, and some general thoughts on the game. If you enjoy this video or you find it useful, please do click the like button to help other gamers find it, and consider subscribing for more gaming content and videos. If you've got questions about the game that I haven't covered, then please do drop me a comment below so I can get back to you with an answer. So first off, the good things. These are the things that I really liked so far in the game. Firstly, the graphics. The game isn't what I call stunning, but it has nice character textures, though the hair choices look a bit wig-like, and the facial choices all look quite unnatural to me, despite the fact apparently they're based on photo scanning technology. Hopefully this is something that will be improved over the early access timeframe. In general, the game looks pretty good. The maps are nicely detailed and lit and provide appropriate ambience, and the ability to scroll in and out gives you a nice compromise between that sort of classic isometric view of the original two games and the newer, more modern perspective we see in most games these days. The second thing I really liked was the combat, overall that is. The game includes some great tactical features, such as incorporating high ground advantages for making ranged attacks, moving and stacking objects to stand on or behind, such as crates, and some great interactable elements on the map, such as being able to throw things like a bottle of grease into a choke point and then use fire to set the entire area alight. The other thing I really like is the voice acting. In general, this is also well done, though some of the conversations are not yet animated. I'm sure that'll come in time though. The third thing, and perhaps the thing I like the most though, is the setting. Going back to Dungeons and Dragons and this particular locations and characters and factions that are from that universe, and how much mileage you get out of this will depend on whether you've played many Dungeons and Dragons games before. But for an example, as someone who's played a number of Dungeons and Dragons tabletop adventures, meeting a bunch of Zentarum smugglers, or going through the spell list even and recognizing spells that my tabletop characters regularly use, and being able to recreate even my arcane trickster rogue character in the game, that was pretty cool. So now onto the things that I thought were not so great at the moment, and just to preface this with, again, this is early access, and many of these things could, and indeed I hope will, improve over time during the early access period. Of course there are glitches. One thing I got regularly was bodies would spin into a weird death spiral quite often and end up stuck inside a ceiling or a wall where you can't get to them. I also had a few instances of falling through maps, though to be fair, this was more about me making my character jump somewhere they weren't supposed to go, even though the game didn't do a good job of telling me that. For example, in one level I was trying to jump down from one floor of a ship into another, but that floor, while it was rendered and it looked solid, was never intended to be visited, and so my character just kept falling through the floor and dying until I figured out I was going in the wrong direction. Which leads me on to my next point, and that is that the game doesn't do a lot of hand-holding in terms of telling you where to go or where not to go past the initial tutorial level. The game is obviously designed to be played with a full party, and it's very easy in the early stages to struggle a bit if you happen to wander into the one of the more challenging areas of the first open world area before you've picked up your full party of companions. And lastly, classes and companions. While the game gives you a choice of 6 starting classes, rogue, cleric, wizard, fighter, ranger and warlock, and also subclasses, and they've given you at least 2 for every class being touted at early access, the game starts with one of your companions locked into their subclass, and this is the cleric, and you have to pre-choose your subclass straight off if you want to be a cleric as well. And annoyingly, it's that companion that's your party's prime healer, and the trickery domain that they're locked into is the domain that sort of focuses away from healing, so it just seems like a bit of an odd choice. It's a bit disappointing that the main companions featured in the early access match the chosen player classes, with the exception of the ranger, because, and as many D&D tabletop players will know, effective parties means having a range of skills, and while double-ups aren't impossible, they're generally less optimal. Since you have to sit out some of your surplus party members at your home camp anyway, because you can only take a smaller number with you, you probably won't be spending a lot of time with whichever character matches your chosen class. On the flip side, this is another reason to replay the game to experience it alongside different members, but in at least the initial game that I came away sort of feeling away, the more combat-orientated groups of fighters and clerics had an easier time due to their better armor and hit points in the early game at least. I can only hope that in the future that the other popular classes such as Paladin, Bard, Sorcerer and Druid will also come to the game at some point. To miss those classes out leaves the game feeling a bit light to experienced D&D players who will be used to having a wider selection to choose from. And lastly, to touch on the other stuff. And this is things that I noticed while I didn't really think they were necessarily good or bad or such. They're things that affect your enjoyment of the game one way or the other depending on your expectations and perhaps your point of view. Many of these come from the way that the mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons has been implemented into this title, both behind the scenes and in player actions, choices and interactions. The first thing is that the game is fairly brutal in regards to combat and character death. When characters go down, in terms of reaching 0 hit points, you need to get another character over to help them, get them back up again on 1 hit point, or they risk dying, which, unlike many other games where as soon as combat over all the wounded stand back up, in D&D, dead means dead, and you'll have to rely on obtaining revive scrolls initially to help bring back your fallen party members. The game is brutal not just because the characters will get knocked down to 0 hit points, but that enemies will intentionally target them to finish them off to ensure that they are dead. If you do help your party member to stand back on 1 hit point, be it via the help action or some healing spell, you can be pretty sure on their next turn that wounded character will be target number 1 for any enemy forces nearby to put them right back down again. This is perhaps a bit different to your friendly local D&D game where once a character is down and no longer a threat, the DM will usually target a different character rather than trying to kill the wounded character off completely. And as I alluded to in my last point, the game steps into a turn-based system once combat is initiated, just like how real players and monsters take turns when playing the real Dungeons & Dragons. There have been so many different computer RPGs over history that have drawn from Dungeons & Dragons for inspiration, and have used so many different combat systems that it took me a while to get used to having the same turn-based attitude in the game that I do when playing D&D around the table with friends. In particular, the use of actions, bonus actions, and reactions. While there are some differences to the real RPG here, the core concepts are the same, and might take a little figuring out for people who are new to the idea, as the game doesn't really do an amazing job of explaining them. In short, for those who have not played Dungeons & Dragons before, you get to move a certain distance depending on your character type, or your race. You get to do a main action, usually something like an attack or casting of most spells, and you get to do a bonus action, usually a smaller, less powerful action. Reactions are something that you can set your character to do when something happens that's not in their turn, the default one being to take a strike at any enemy who tries to move away from your melee range. True to Dungeons & Dragons, skill rolls happen automatically based on a d20 in the background with a subtle rattle of dice and an icon over the character's head along with the skill that's being tested. It seems almost a bit counterintuitive to be told that your perception roll failed while you're sneaking towards an ancient sarcophagus, which really means, yes, there's a trap here, no, you didn't see it, so be prepared to get very injured. One thing the developers could do that would mitigate this would be to have more false positive perception rolls, i.e. you look and there's indeed nothing here. Something that happens in actual D&D adventures a lot where players are looking for possible traps, but there might not be any there. And the way you don't know, if your DM says you don't see anything, you don't know whether there is actually anything there or not. The skill rolls also flow over into conversation options, where the character can roll a d20 using specific attributes, such as persuasion or deception, or attempting to beat a required difficulty level. Again, this is an area while mechanically is true to real-life D&D, the lack of a real DM sometimes leads to some unusual outcomes, such as rolling a 1 and failing on what should have been an easy conversation option that you only needed, say, a 5 or more. This is the sort of thing in a real D&D group that another player might be able to try and intercede and help the persuasion to allow another attempt. This is compounded in Baldur's Gate 3 by some inconsistent conversation options. Some conversations will give multiple options to proceed, such as persuading, intimidating, or deceiving, and they'll give multiple chances to attempt the other options if your first choice didn't pan out. But other conversations do not. You give one choice, and if you are unsuccessful, that's it. And the game doesn't sort of really indicate which is which at the time. In short, I believe the D20 based roles working well in a D&D group, where the DM can help to moderate the outcome. They struggle to provide a consistent experience at the moment, where the computer simply decides based on the raw numbers of the dice. So in conclusion, it's obvious from the storyline and the detailed mechanics and the environments that Larian's put a lot of passion into Baldur's Gate 3, and fans of Dungeons & Dragons will enjoy seeing these iconic monsters, classes, spells, and locations that they're used to exploring around their gaming table in a new adventure in a new format. However, there are a few bumps in the road, and I'm not entirely convinced that a literal translation of all the mechanics from tabletop to computer screen work without the grace of a benevolent DM or the agency of other party members to help smooth the road sometimes. Sometimes, particularly in conversation fails, this came across as particularly jarring, especially if it forced me into killing an NPC that I really didn't want to kill at all, just because I rolled utterly poorly on one dice roll that locked me out of any further conversation options. So can I recommend this game? Well, one big thing to consider at the moment is the price point that Baldur's Gate 3 is positioned at. At $60 it's a full price game, even in early access, and it's scheduled to be in early access for another year still. Yet at this stage there's only a fraction of the content and plenty of bugs abound. Being a story-driven adventure, whilst there's going to be variance in certain quests and outcomes and different characters that you can play through as, the big question I'd ask you is, would you be happy replaying the game over the next year as new content releases if you have to restart, and possibly multiple times over the course of early access, as new content is added, or as changes get made that saves aren't compatible with continuing? For this price point, I'm not sure if I can say yes or no at this stage, as I think it will really depend more on your approach to RPGs. If you're someone who enjoys multiple playthroughs and exploring every possible side quest, then I'm sure you'll find a lot to like here. If you're the type of gamer who prefers a one-and-done, single playthrough, then perhaps hold off until the full release and experience everything that Baldur's Gate 3 has to offer in one go might suit you better. I hope you enjoyed this preview of Baldur's Gate 3. I hope you found it useful. If you've got any questions, then please do leave me a comment below, and remember, if you found it useful, to like and consider subscribing for more gaming content. Thanks for watching.